Well, good morning again, church. We are going to have our lesson this morning. We're going to continue this series we've been doing on speaking words that heal and not words that hurt. And the Bible, as we've said before, tells us that words have the power of life and death. God's desire is for all of us to learn how to bring our tongues under control so that our words will bring life. And so far in our series, we've talked about the truth of lying, malignant speech, that is gossip and slander, ego talk, the boasting, flattery, exaggeration. And today we're going to look at corrosive talk. That's speaking words of complaining, words of criticizing. And I like the story of the man who wanted to or decided to join a monastery. And one of the rules of this particular monastery group was that you were only allowed to speak 2 words at the end of every 10 years. At the end of the first 10 years, he said, "Food bad." 10 years later, 20 years into it, he said, "Bed hard." And finally, on his 30th anniversary at the monastery, he said his 2 words, "I quit." And the monk in charge responded, "It doesn't surprise me a bit. You've done nothing but complain ever since you got here." You know, is that an apt description of us when we look at ourselves, our lives, the way we talk? Are we like that monk who, all we ever do and all the words that we ever get to say, are they just complaining and criticizing? I think when it comes to a lot of folks out there, we're very careful to tell the truth. We try not to gossip or slander. We try not to swear or use God's name in vain. But maybe we're missing out on something here when maybe we're paying very little attention to the corrosive words of complaining and criticizing. It can easily flow from our mouths, just like all the other things we've looked at. And so I've decided to call this corrosive words because we all understand the way acid works, right? Whatever it touches, it burns and it eats away. It may be slow, but it corrodes things, it burns things away. And that's what corrosive words do to whatever they touch. They destroy our spiritual life and they destroy our relationships, just like everything that we've been looking at with the tongue and the way we could use it in an evil way. So if any of us want a formula to destroy our relationship with God and others, or to formulate a way to destroy our life in general, this is it. Give yourself over to complaining and criticizing. All we have to do is give ourselves to complaining about everything. And I mean everything. The weather, the election, the economy, the government, our jobs, our boss. Just go through the list, our spouse, our siblings, our parents, our children. It's amazing how many things we can find to complain about. Imagine how that kind of complaining is going to bless that person's life and their relationship with God or with others. It's not a pretty picture, is it? If it's not enough, let's add this to the complaining: a constant stream of criticizing. And you may, when we think of criticizing, we think of big time criticizing, but criticizing can be little things. Stop chewing your gum like that. Don't leave your hair in the sink. Clean up after yourself. All those things may be true. Don't slam the door when you go outside. Quit leaving me with an empty gas tank or whatever. Stop forgetting about your homework. All these other things and all this stuff. Again, it's not a pretty picture. We may be thinking, well, but those things are true, Chris. Those things are true. Well, think about it. What if all you ever did, when I'm using those ways you may say to your spouse or to your children, what if that's all you ever did? All you ever did was tell them, why did you get up late? Get your breakfast eaten. Stop fidgeting. Get your fingers out of your mouth. Stop that. Stop this. Stop. All you ever do is criticize that child. What is that child going to grow up to be? They're going to grow up to think, I can't do anything right, because of the criticism that we may be constantly bearing down upon them. To be honest about it, I think we would all admit that we have done our fair share of complaining and criticizing. And this kind of corrosive speech has a variety of roots. It can come from our anger that builds up inside of us and needs an outlet. It can come from our irritation that can be produced by many things going on around us. It can come from our disappointment when things don't go as expected or people don't treat us the way we hoped they would treat us. It can come from impatience with others. It can come from impatience with ourselves. It can come from general stress that can come as a combination of a number of things that we've already mentioned. It can even come from our own guilt and insecurity as we are disappointed with our own behavior or disappointed with our choices, or we question our ability to make something good of our lives. So there are many reasons and many roots that explain why we might be prone to corrosive talk. What does the Bible say about complaining and criticizing? Well, the Bible is clear that this kind of talk is not to be coming from the mouths of God's people. Philippians chapter 2, verses 14 to 15. I apologize, I didn't tell you to turn there in the beginning. This is our ground, our beginning platform of Scripture. There in Philippians 2, 14 and 15, Paul writes, "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world." The idea of being overly critical or to be one who criticizes is expressed in the biblical ideas of strife, discord, nagging. Now, in the book of Proverbs, Solomon focuses on the quarrelsome person being a wife in chapter 21. We all know, though, that quarrelsome one can be easily the husband, right? It could be either one. Proverbs 21:9. "It is better to live in a corner of a roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman." That word contentious, nagging. That can be the word nagging. Same thing with the husband. Verse 19 of Proverbs 21. "It is better to live in a desert land than with a contentious and vexing woman." Proverbs 27:15. "A constant dripping on a day of steady rain and a contentious woman are alike." And then Paul gets into this in 1 Timothy 3:3 when he tells us that the elder must not be addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. Don't be pugnacious. And then Solomon also says in Proverbs 26:21, "Like charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife." And I really like this one. We've used this one before. Proverbs 22:10, "Drive out the scoffer, and contention will go out. Even strife and dishonor will cease." Nowhere in Scripture is complaining and criticizing more graphically depicted than in the case of the children of Israel. In the end, those Jewish adults, remember when they came out of Egypt, they were denied entrance into the promised land. Why? They're complaining and they're criticizing. That was evidence of their faithlessness. We could look at numerous examples of their complaining and criticizing, but for our purposes, I want us to focus in on the ones in Numbers chapter 13 and 14. You may remember the people of Israel were were up there on the edge of the promised land for the first time. You had those 12 spies. 10 were bad, and 2 were good, right? And so to 10 of those 12, they had this report to say in Numbers 13, 32, and 33, "The land through which we have gone," they said, "and spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight. So we were in their sight." That sounds pretty bad. Who wants to go in there? But here's Joshua and Caleb, while affirming the details of the account. They said, yeah, okay, true, but they maintained that God was able to give his people the promised land. Oh man, the virus is everywhere. We can't go out. We can't do this. Government, riots, this, that, the other, all these things are tearing us apart. Have you forgotten who's sitting on the throne? Don't be like the 10. Remember Joshua and Caleb. They affirmed, yeah, these things are happening, but God will get us through it. He's with us. We can do this. And they were positive, despite the insurmountable odds that everyone saw. The whole story of Numbers 13 and 14 are a perfect example of the destructiveness of complaining and criticizing. So let's notice what complaining and criticizing leads to. Number one, it ignores God's potential. The report of the 10 spies was given from a godless perspective. Surely if God had brought them through the plagues of Egypt, had opened the sea to save them and gave them a path out of there, away from Egypt's army, he opened at that rock, provided that water from it when they were thirsty. If he could do all that, you think you could deal with those giants in the land? We ignore God's potential because we forget what he's already done. And we forget that he keeps his promises. Don't do that. Number two, complaining and criticizing leads to wrong conclusions and bad judgments. The grumbling Israelites said, why is the Lord bringing us into this land? To fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. That's Numbers 14, 3 and 4. Their conclusions about God's intentions could not be further from the truth. But when our godless grumbling gets rolling, wrong conclusions, bad judgments are easy to accept. Number three, complaining and criticizing leads to self-pity. The Israelites declared there in Numbers 14:2, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Those given to complaining and criticizing often feel sorry for themselves. They nurse those feelings of self-pity and mistreatment. Number four, complaining and criticizing leads to fear. Twice in the story, Joshua and Caleb exhorted the people not to fear. And when we find ourselves in difficult circumstances, like the Israelites did, we realize that the odds may be against us and the situation is beyond our control. If we forget about our God, then we will feel threatened and insecure. The more we complain, the more we criticize, the more afraid we'll become. What if the election doesn't go the way we want it to go? And we think if this person wins, then all's lost. What are we going to do? Are we going to complain, criticize? Are we going to forget who's in control? Let's not do that. Number five, complaining and criticizing breeds rebellion. Joshua and Caleb urged the murmuring Israelites not to rebel against the Lord. The Israelites were ready to elect new leaders and to stone those who oppressed their rebellious plans. And finally, complaining and criticizing results in God's judgment. And his judgment on the Israelites was swift and final. What did their complaining and criticizing get them? They defamed God's presence. They defamed his power and his glory. And so what did he do? He punished them when they behaved this way. So not only did those Israelites experience God's judgment, they also missed out on his blessings. Not one of them would get to enter the promised land. Not one. The example of the Israelites is one that we want to learn from and to avoid. We need to keep that in mind. Remember what the New Testament writer said about the Old Testament. It's there for our example and our instruction. How did God treat them when they were complaining over and over and criticizing over and over again? He took the blessings away. So how do we stop? If we have this problem of complaining and criticizing, how do we stop? How can we keep our hearts from developing that way so that our tongues will not spew those corrosive words? Well, I got several practical suggestions. One, I would suggest that we need to be realistic. Again, I like these stories. There's a story about an old man who limped into a doctor's office, and he said, "Doctor, my knee hurts so bad I can hardly walk." The doctor slowly eyed him from head to toe and then said, "Sir, how old are you?" The man said, "I'm 98. The old man announced proudly. And the doctor just sighed and said, "Sir, you are almost 100 years old, and you're complaining that your knee hurts. Well, what did you expect?" And the old man said, "Well, my other knee is 98 years old too, and it doesn't hurt." Because we live in an imperfect world with imperfect people, then we need to expect that things and people are not going to be the way we might like them to be. Realistically speaking, there are always going to be these opportunities to complain and criticize. Satan, our enemy, he's going to make sure we have plenty of things to find fault with. We need to, therefore, make sure our expectations are in line with what is realistic. Well, what I'm trying to say is, often we must lower our expectations. Sometimes we set ourselves up for complaining and criticizing because our expectations are too high. If we expect that we are always going to get what we want, when we want it, we've just set ourselves up for some serious disappointment. If we expect that people are always going to do the right thing and do what is best for us, then we are in for a rude awakening. If we expect that life is going to be easy and without challenges and difficulties, then we're going to really struggle when it doesn't go that way, right? And that struggle will be intensified by our unrealistic expectations. The truth of the matter is that life is often unfair and difficult, and many of us either have been or will be dealt a difficult hand, so to speak. In the real world we live in, some people we trusted might do us wrong. Maybe it's our spouse, don't keep our vows, life-threatening diseases strike, loved ones die unexpectedly. And when things like this happen, we may feel that we have every reason to complain or criticize, but we need to not do that. As difficult as it may be, we must bite our tongue, allow God to calm our spirit. We know how bad things got for Jesus, right? Yet he controlled his tongue. Remember Isaiah 53 verse 7 says, "He was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb being led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth." The ability to control our tongues is, in those kind of circumstances, begins by being realistic in our expectations, bringing those things down to a realistic area, not having those lofty expectations. Number two, I would suggest that we need to be grateful. The main cause of complaining and criticizing is focusing on the negative. Instead of thanking God for what we do have, we complain maybe about what we don't have. Oh, if I only had this, if I only had that, if I only had this ability. Instead of focusing on how far we have come in life and all that God has done for us, maybe we're focusing on how far we still have to go. Although we may not be where we want to be right now, we can thank God that we aren't where we once were. Although we may not have the best job in the world right now, we can thank God that we are employed. Or maybe we don't have a job. We can thank God that we live in a country where we have opportunities and we're not just thrown out into the street immediately once we lose that work. And just as we can always find something to complain about or to be critical of, so can we always find something for which to be grateful. I love to listen to my children pray when they're praying for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. They're so simple and they're understanding. They learn from Jenny and I, and pretty much all their prayers was always being what they're thankful for. And some of the things they're thankful for are just so sweet. I love it. I wish I had it recorded. So we need to be like children, always thankful for what we have, even our forks and our spoons, even for the leaves on the flower, as Jody prayed just the other day. 1 Thessalonians 5:18, in everything give thanks, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. We need to realize that the thanklessness that comes out of in that complaining and criticizing is not ultimately a response to circumstances. It's an accusation against God. We may think we are just complaining and criticizing our situation or the people around us, but in reality, we're judging God, who has allowed us to be right where we are. Ultimately, our heart of gratitude and thankfulness isn't dependent on our bank statement or the doctor's diagnosis or the praise we receive for a job well done. Rather, a heart of gratitude and thankfulness comes from a heart that loves God and recognizes all of the blessings of God. Spiritual amnesia, the forgetting of God's presence, deliverance, and provision, is a deadly disease, and it leads to corrosive speech. The antidote for this is to remember, to learn to count our blessings and be grateful. Number 3, I would suggest that we need to be forward-looking. What I mean by this is that rather than speaking words of complaint and criticism, we need to speak with positive expectations. Although things are not the way we would like them to be, we trust that God can change that in the future, or God will enable us to endure the situation. So we bring our concerns and even our complaints directly to God. And we do so while expressing our belief that God knows and cares and will do what is best for us. Now, someone might not have done what they should have done. Rather than tearing them down with criticism, we can build them up by explaining how they need to do better, or expressing that we believe they can do better next time. And that's looking forward with a positive expectation. And I admit, I'm guilty of criticism and complaining. We all are, to some degree. We need to work on these things. There's always a place to improve in life, right? I think we all can improve on a lot of things with our tongues. Finally, I would suggest that we need to be different. The easiest thing in the world is to complain and criticize. God calls us to be different, right? He wants us to do everything without complaining, without arguing, do everything without grumbling or complaining, so that we will stand out from others. When we don't complain, when we don't criticize like others, then people take notice that there is something different about us. By not complaining and criticizing, we can be that light shining in the universe. So let's make that our goal, to be different by not complaining and not being so critical with our words. We could start every day with a goal of going to the whole day without complaining or criticizing. There was an English preacher in the 1700s. I've given this before, but I like it. He was considered a spiffy dresser, and one Sunday morning, he wore a bow tie that had long ribbons that hung downward. And after the sermon was over, a lady walked up to him and said, "Brother, are you open to some criticism?" He said, "I guess so. What would you like to criticize?" "The ribbons on your tie are entirely too long and inappropriate for a man of God." So the woman took out some scissors and cut off the ribbons of his bow tie. A hush fell over the people standing there as the preacher calmly asked, "May I borrow the scissors for a moment?" Reluctantly, she handed them over. And he said, "Ma'am, are you open to some criticism?" She answered, "Well, I suppose I am." "Okay, then, please stick out your tongue." I'm not suggesting we cut out our tongues. But if we want to be different and shine like stars in the universe, then we need to keep our tongue from corrosive talk by doing 2 additional things. Think first. I've said this in every one of the lessons almost, I think. Think before we speak. Is it true helpful, inspiring, necessary, and kind. T-H-I-N-K. Think. Talk less. The more we talk, the more likely we are to say something we shouldn't. So, one of the important ways to control our tongue is to simply use it less. And that's the lesson. I hope you take this with you. Don't judge me. I mean, judge me in the sense, Chris, you're preaching all this, but you do these things. Well, I know I do. I do have this problem. I have a lot of these problems in some degree or another. We all do. I have a lot of places where I can grow at. And I know I have been complaining and criticizing a lot about the pandemic. Maybe I need to scale that back, don't I? Think about who's in charge. I think that's something we all could work on in some way or another. So let's think about this. Let's pray about this in our own lives and for the whole church and for the whole world, that we may begin here to show them the light. If you're not part of the North Valley Church of Christ, you're watching this from YouTube or our website, wherever it might be, we want to encourage you to come to our website, www.nvcoc.net. Learn about the congregation here. You'll find out that we are Christians who are striving to be just Christians. We study just the Bible. We're not trying to label ourselves this, that, or the other. We don't want to be a part of some big conglomeration. We just simply want to please God. And if that's your goal, if you want that changed life, if you want to be around like-minded folks, this is the place. We hope we get to see you one day here at our building when all things are over, if the Lord blesses us with that. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Let's have some more songs.